In the late summer of 55 BC, proconsul Julius Caesar stood on the western bank of the Rhine River, staring directly into the uncharted forests of Germania. For generations, this volatile, natural frontier marked the absolute edge of the known world, guarded by a deep, fast-moving current that the Germanic tribes believed would permanently shield them from Roman retaliation. But the tribal warriors taunting the legions from the opposite shore drastically misunderstood the strategic mind of the Roman commander. Caesar realized that to secure Gaul and pacify the north, he did not need to fight a massive pitched battle on enemy terms. He needed to conquer nature itself. Soon, the deafening rhythmic thud of massive iron-tipped wooden piles being driven into the treacherous riverbed echoed across the water, shattering the confidence of the Germanic watchers. To prove that nowhere was safe from Roman authority, Caesar ordered his army to halt their campaign and construct a permanent timber highway across a river nearly 1,300 feet wide. It was a logistical and physical nightmare. If the structure failed, 40,000 legionaries would be swallowed by the crushing current. Yet, in just 10 days, the Roman engineers solved a mathematical impossibility, turning raw timber and physics into a weapon of absolute psychological terror. Welcome back to World Chronicles. Today, we break down one of the greatest feats of military engineering in human history, Caesar's bridge across the Rhine. We will examine the exact structural design, the unparalleled labor discipline of the Roman legions, and how a temporary wooden bridge built to break the tribal will fundamentally shifted the balance of power on the ancient European frontier. By 55 BC, Julius Caesar was 3 years into his rigorous conquest of Gaul. His supply lines were stretched, and his political enemies in the Roman Senate were watching closely for any sign of failure. The greatest threat to his campaign did not come from the Gallic tribes he had just subjugated, but from the east, across the Rhine. This massive waterway was more than a geographical border. It was a psychological wall separating the known Roman world from the deep, uncharted forests of Germania. The immediate crisis was sparked when 2 large Germanic tribes, the Usipetes and the Tencteri, comprising hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children, crossed the Rhine into northern Gaul. They had been driven from their own lands by the formidable Suebi, a highly aggressive Germanic confederation that dominated the interior. For Caesar, a mass migration of Germanic warriors into newly pacified territory was politically and militarily unacceptable. If one tribe successfully settled in Gaul, others would follow, unraveling the entire Roman conquest. The proconsul responded with absolute ruthlessness. After a breakdown in negotiations, the Roman legions launched a devastating surprise attack on the unorganized Germanic camp. The result was a wholesale massacre. The Roman infantry drove the panicked Usipetes and Tencteri toward the confluence of the Meuse and the Rhine, cutting them down without mercy. Only a fraction of the Germanic cavalry managed to escape the slaughter, fleeing back across the Rhine to seek sanctuary with the Sugambri tribe on the eastern bank. From that eastern shore, the surviving warriors and their allies watched the Romans with bitter defiance. In the ancient military paradigm, a river of this magnitude was considered an ultimate defense. The Rhine was up to 30 feet deep in places, with a violent, freezing current that easily tore away small boats and would drag a heavily armored legionary straight to the bottom. The Germanic chieftains operated on a simple, effective, strategic calculation. They could cross over to raid Gallic territory whenever they pleased, and when the regular troops marched to meet them, they could simply retreat across the water. As long as the river stood between them, Rome could not project sustained power into Germania. If this dynamic remained, the Roman frontier in Gaul would bleed out from endless incursions, and Caesar's political standing in Rome would collapse. He recognized that border security required more than just winning defensive battles on Roman soil. It required proving that the empire could strike the enemy in their own home. The Germanic warriors gathered on the far bank believed the treacherous water provided an absolute, impenetrable shield. But they had no idea that Caesar's chief engineers were already measuring the current, preparing a command decision that would force 40,000 men to march directly over the crushing depths. The Ubii, a Germanic tribe allied with Rome and desperate for protection against the relentless expansion of the Suebi Confederation, offered Caesar a seemingly pragmatic solution. They promised to provide a massive fleet of shallow draft riverboats to ferry the Roman legions across the water. From a purely logistical standpoint, a rapid amphibious crossing was the most efficient way to project force into enemy territory. Yet, Caesar categorically refused the offer. In his own meticulously kept commentaries, the proconsul recorded that crossing in borrowed boats was not only fundamentally unsafe in the chaotic currents, but it completely failed to befit his own honor and standing, as well as the majesty of the Roman people. In the political and military framework of the late Republic, personal prestige was the driving currency of a Roman aristocrat's career, an intricate blend of honor, social standing, and an aura of invincibility. Caesar understood that ancient warfare was driven as much by the theater of power as it was by the sword. If the Roman army crossed the Rhine huddled in foreign boats, they would appear vulnerable, entirely dependent on their Germanic allies and at the mercy of the river. To permanently shatter the confidence of the hostile tribes, the Roman invasion had to look like an unstoppable force. Caesar, therefore, issued a command that defied conventional military logic. The legions would halt their punitive campaign, transition into a unified labor force, and construct a permanent-style timber highway directly over the Rhine. The sheer scale of this engineering mandate bordered on the impossible. At the chosen crossing point, likely near modern-day Neuwied, the river spanned nearly 1,300 feet from bank to bank. Beneath the churning surface, the riverbed was a treacherous mix of mud and uneven bedrock, scoured constantly by a violent, fast-moving current. The water reached depths of up to 30 feet, fueled by alpine runoff that maintained a paralyzing chill even in the late summer. Standard Roman military doctrine allowed for temporary pontoon bridges made of lashed boats for quick river crossing. But Caesar was not building a temporary tactical pontoon. He demanded a massive, fixed wooden structure driven straight into the earth, capable of supporting heavy cavalry, supply wagons, and the synchronized march of tens of thousands of heavily armored infantry. The responsibility for this unprecedented project fell to the chief engineers of the Roman army. These specialists operated at the cutting edge of ancient technology, but even they had never attempted to conquer a waterway of this magnitude under active hostile observation. They had to design a blueprint that would not merely resist the massive kinetic force of the Rhine, but actively use the river's own current to lock its timber joints tighter. It was a calculated display of dominance designed to prove that Rome could impose geometric order upon the wildest frontiers of Europe. To build it, Caesar's engineers had to solve a mathematical and physical nightmare in a matter of days. And if the structure failed, 40,000 legionaries would be swallowed by the current. The Roman military machine did not merely destroy, it constructed with the same ruthless efficiency. Upon Caesar's command, the dense forests of northern Gaul were subjected to an industrial-scale harvest. Thousands of legionaries stowed their weapons and took up heavy iron axes, felling enormous quantities of timber. The Roman encampment rapidly transitioned from a staging ground for infantry into a sprawling, hyper-efficient factory. Every soldier among the 40,000-strong force understood his exact function. Specialized cohorts handled the precise carpentry, stripping bark and shaping complex joints, while thousands of heavy infantrymen functioned as a synchronized labor pool, hauling massive, unyielding logs toward the riverbank. This operation was devoid of chaos. It was governed by the strict, measured cadence of the centurions, turning raw physical labor into a direct extension of military drill. Out on the water, the chief engineers directed a logistical ballet. Working from flat-bottomed boats and standing waist-deep in the freezing, fast-moving runoff of the Rhine, the Legionaries deployed heavy Roman pile drivers. These mechanical cranes hoisted massive weights, repeatedly smashing the sharpened, 18-inch thick timber columns deep into the uneven bedrock. To neutralize the kinetic force of the river, the engineers angled the upstream piles to lean slightly with the direction of the current, while the downstream supports were driven in at an opposing angle. When connected by heavy transverse beams, this geometric configuration meant that the harder the river pushed against the bridge, the tighter the wooden joints locked together. It was a self-reinforcing structure, utilizing the Rhine's own violent momentum to ensure its stability. Caesar's engineers also anticipated the tactical responses of their enemy. Knowing that the hostile tribes upstream might attempt to destroy the bridge by floating massive, uprooted trees down the river to act as primitive battering rams, the Romans constructed a defensive perimeter in the water itself. They drove an additional, separate row of heavy timber stakes into the riverbed just ahead of the main structure, creating a specialized breakwater to absorb and deflect any incoming debris. Over this impenetrable foundation, they laid a wide thoroughfare of long poles and bundles of sticks, creating a flat, highly stable surface capable of supporting heavy cavalry, supply wagons, and artillery without shifting. The velocity of this construction shattered ancient paradigms of warfare. From the exact moment the first tree was felled in the Gallic woods to the fastening of the final timber, only 10 days had elapsed. For the Germanic scouts, watching from the eastern bank, the psychological impact was devastating. They were forced to watch an untamed wilderness systematically disassembled and converted into an unstoppable geometric Roman highway driving straight into their territory. The natural barrier that had protected their ancestors for centuries had been conquered by mathematics and discipline. As the final planks were laid and the bridge stood firm against the water, the silence on the far bank spoke volume. The time for building was over. The time for marching had arrived. The command to advance was given, and the Roman war machine stepped onto the timber. To ensure his line of retreat remained absolute, Caesar ordered the immediate construction of fortified camps at both the Gallic and Germanic ends of the bridge, leaving a highly disciplined garrison to secure the structure against sabotage. Then, the main expeditionary force began its crossing. The rhythmic, deafening thunder of tens of thousands of iron-studded sandals, the caligae of the legionaries, striking the raw wooden planks, echoed for miles down the river valley. For the first time in documented history, a regular field army of 40,000 Roman heavy infantry and auxiliary cavalry marched directly over the Rhine, their tightly packed columns advancing with a measured, unstoppable momentum that entirely ignored the violent depths churning just feet below them. For the Germanic tribes watching from the eastern territories, this crossing triggered the total collapse of their military paradigm. The Rhine, the ancient and seemingly insurmountable barrier that had dictated the geography of northern European warfare for centuries, was no longer a shield. Roman engineering had transformed it into a hostile highway. The smaller, peripheral tribes such as the Suebi, who had previously begged for Roman intervention, immediately sent envoys to the advancing column, formally submitting to the proconsul and offering hostage. But Caesar's true target in this display of dominance was the Suebi, the massive and highly aggressive tribal confederation that dominated the Germanic interior and whose expansionist pressure had originally sparked the crisis in Gaul. Facing the unprecedented reality of a Roman army operating on their side of the river, the Suebi chieftains issued a strategic decree. across their land. Rather than marching out to meet the legions in a conventional pitched battle, they chose a policy of tactical withdrawal. Runners carried orders to abandon all settlements near the river. Women, children, livestock, and all movable wealth were evacuated deep into the dense, uncharted wilderness. Meanwhile, the seasoned warriors from various clans were directed to converge at a heavily defended rallying point positioned in the geographical center of Suebian territory. The chieftains understood the lethality of Roman heavy infantry in open combat and sought to neutralize it through extreme terrain. By stripping the frontier of resources and retreating, the Suebi intended to stretch Roman supply lines to their breaking point and lure the rigid legionary formations into a hostile, unmapped environment. A dense forest negated the advantage of the sword and the shield, creating the perfect conditions for an ambush. The Suebi withdrew into the impenetrable woods, preparing to bleed the legions in an endless guerrilla war. But Caesar had not crossed the Rhine to fight a battle on their terms. Caesar's intelligence network, supplemented by allied Ubii scouts, fully understood the geographic trap the Suebi had laid. The proconsul recognized that marching tightly packed formations of heavy infantry into the dense primeval forests of the interior would strip the legions of their greatest advantages: unit cohesion, geometric formation, and tactical communication. The Suebi wanted a chaotic, close-quarters ambush in the woods, hoping to neutralize Roman armor and discipline. But Caesar possessed the absolute command restraint to refuse a battle that did not serve his strategic interest. He understood that in ancient geopolitics, projecting power did not always require a massive casualty count. The simple reality of a Roman army operating unchallenged in the heart of Germania was enough to shatter the illusion of Suebian invincibility. For exactly 18 days, the Roman expeditionary force executed a phantom campaign, substituting pitched battle with systematic economic and psychological warfare. Operating with cold, methodical efficiency, the legions spread out through the abandoned territories of the hostile tribe. They burned the empty villages to the ground and systematically cut down the late summer crops, destroying the region's agricultural capacity just weeks before the critical harvest window. The heavy, acrid smoke of burning grain fields became the only physical testament to Rome's presence, visible for miles across the canopy. By dismantling the economic infrastructure of the frontier with absolute impunity, Caesar demonstrated that the most aggressive Germanic tribes could not protect their own lands, let alone sustain an invasion of Gaul. The political fallout of this devastation was immediate. While the massive Suebi army remained paralyzed in the deep woods, waiting for a Roman assault that never materialized, the peripheral power structures of the region began to fracture. Realizing that the Suebi could not defend them against the reach of the legions, several smaller, unaligned tribes dispatched envoys to the Roman camp. They formally submitted to Caesar's authority, handing over noble hostages to guarantee their future compliance. Through calculated restraint and a display of unchecked logistical supremacy, Caesar completely realigned the tribal hierarchy of the Rhine frontier without committing his heavy infantry to a single clash in the forest. Having achieved every one of his strategic objectives, securing the borders of Gaul, relieving pressure on his allies, and establishing Roman dominance on the eastern bank, the proconsul determined that the expedition was complete. Having sent a message that would echo across northern Europe, Caesar gave the order to return to Gaul. But the final act of this psychological masterstroke was yet to come. The expeditionary force of 40,000 Roman heavy infantry and cavalry executed a flawless withdrawal, marching westward back across the timber thoroughfare and into the safety of pacified Gallic territory. Once the rear guard stepped off the wooden planks, Caesar issued an order that might seem counterintuitive to a conquering commander: the immediate and total destruction of the bridge. From a purely strategic standpoint, Leaving the structure intact presented an unacceptable military liability. A permanent 1,300-foot highway over the Rhine was a two-way street. If left unguarded, or if the Roman garrison were eventually overrun, the bridge would provide the massive Suebi Confederation with a direct, paved invasion route straight into the heart of Roman Gaul. Caesar's objective had never been the permanent annexation of the dense Germanic forest. He sought a condition of asymmetrical power, proving that the legions could enter Germania at will, while ensuring the hostile tribes had no physical mechanism to follow them back. The same engineering cohorts that had assembled the structural marvel in just 10 days now dismantled it with equal, methodical efficiency. The Legionaries systematically stripped away the roadway, pulling back the upper decking and transverse beams before setting torches to the foundational support. The intense, radiating heat of the burning timber warred against the freezing, violent current of the Rhine as the flames weakened the massive joints. One by one, the heavy, iron-tipped piles that had defied the river were either hacked apart or allowed to collapse, sending enormous columns of wood crashing into the churning depth. Within hours, the river reclaimed its territory. The physical link between the known world of the Roman frontier and the uncharted interior of Germania was severed entirely, leaving only smoke rising from the charred driftwood floating downstream. For the Germanic tribes cautiously returning to the eastern bank, the strategic message was unmistakable. Rome did not need a permanent bridge to threaten them. The imperial administration possessed the engineering capacity to conquer the river whenever it chose, and the discipline to burn its own masterpiece simply because it could. When the dispatches from the northern frontier finally reached the capital in late 55 BC, the political impact was absolute. Caesar's aristocratic rivals in the Senate, who had been actively seeking a legal pretext to recall him and strip him of his command, were effectively silenced by the sheer scale of the achievement. The audacity of conquering a mighty, hostile river that the Roman people considered the absolute edge of the known world captivated the public imagination. Forced by popular demand and the undeniable success of the campaign, the Senate voted a public thanksgiving, a supplicatio, lasting an unprecedented 20 days to honor the proconsul's victory. Caesar had not simply won a skirmish in the woods. He had expanded the psychological horizons of the Republic, proving that the legions could project imperial authority into realms previously thought untouchable. Beyond this immediate political triumph, the 10-day construction project fundamentally altered the strategic geography of ancient Europe. By demonstrating that the Roman army could bridge the impassable at will, Caesar permanently cemented the Rhine River as the hard, psychological boundary between the Roman world and the tribal territories of Germania for centuries to come. More importantly, this expedition codified a defining pillar of Roman military doctrine. It proved to the watching world that Rome's dominance did not rely solely on the brutal, close-quarters lethality of heavy infantry wielding the sword. The ultimate weapon of the Republic was its unparalleled capacity to impose geometric, mathematical order upon the chaotic wilderness. Through the disciplined, synchronized application of the axe, the spade, and raw timber, the legions showed that heavy engineering was a weapon of mass terror. The timber masterpiece of 55 BC existed for less than a month before it was systematically reduced to drifting ash, yet it endured as one of the most effective strategic maneuvers in military history. It stood as a permanent, undeniable warning to any hostile chieftain across the water. No forest was deep enough, and no river was wide enough to stop a Roman advance. The only thing keeping the legions at bay was Rome's own choosing. While Julius Caesar's 10-day engineering masterpiece secured his immediate political and military objectives in 55 BC, its legacy cast a complex shadow over the future of the Roman Empire. By temporarily erasing the Rhine as an insurmountable natural barrier, the proconsul set a highly ambitious precedent for his successors. He had proven that the Roman military machine could project power into the uncharted territories of Germania at will, relying on unparalleled labor discipline and logistical supremacy. Yet, the Phantom campaign he waged also revealed a strategic reality that later Roman commanders would fatally ignore. While imperial engineering could conquer the river, the dense, primeval forests of the Germanic interior actively negated the core strengths of legionary warfare. Decades later, under the reign of Rome's first emperor, Augustus, the central government attempted to transform Caesar's punitive incursions into a permanent annexation of Germania. Believing that the lands east of the Rhine could be pacified and integrated into the empire just as Gaul had been, the military committed massive resources to subjugate the hostile tribal confederation. But the Germanic chieftains had learned from the events of 55 BC. They understood that the regular troops of Rome could not be defeated in open, geometric combat or through conventional siege tactics. Instead, they weaponized the extreme geography of their homeland, drawing the legions deeper into a dense, unmapped wilderness where heavy armor, strict cohort formations, and engineering prowess became severe liabilities. This strategic miscalculation culminated in 9 AD, exactly 64 years after Caesar's crossing, at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. 3 full Roman legions, commanded by Publius Quinctilius Varus, were systematically destroyed in a meticulously planned ambush orchestrated by Arminius, a Germanic commander who had been trained in the Roman auxiliary force. The absolute loss of tens of thousands of men sent shockwaves through the Senate and the imperial household, forcing Augustus to permanently abandon the conquest of the Eastern territory. The devastating defeat violently reaffirmed the boundary that Caesar had once defied. For the next 4 centuries, Rome would heavily garrison the western bank, accepting that while Caesar's bridge had terrified Germania, the Rhine River was the final, unyielding frontier of the empire. Subscribe to our channel to relive the great chapters of history together.